Westerns love to bend the truth. The Old West wasn't all clean hats, quick draws, and campfire songs. It was rough, messy, and often stranger than fiction. But every once in a while, a filmmaker nails it. The clothing, the talk, the dust on the trail, it all feels ripped straight from history books. So which films got it right? Buckle up, because some of the answers might surprise you. Let's ride into the past and see which Westerns actually kept things real. Ride with the Devil 1999. Most Civil War films stick to grand battlefields, polished uniforms, and tidy speeches. Ride with the Devil throws all of that out and drags you into the mud and chaos of Missouri's guerrilla war. Ang Lee doesn't glamorize it. He shows you a brutal, confusing conflict where neighbors turned on neighbors and young men fought in ragged coats with little more than determination and desperation to guide them. Historians love pointing to how much detail Lee got right. The costumes are straight out of 1,860 seconds photographs, from the long frock coats to the floppy hats. The revolvers and rifles weren't props. They were carefully researched, modeled after the real weapons carried by irregular fighters. Even the way the men wore their hair and struggled to grow patchy beards matches period descriptions. The dialogue also matters. Instead of modern slang dressed up in cowboy talk, the characters speak with the kind of rustic formality pulled from old letters and diaries. It's a style that reminds you how different and yet familiar their world was. Ang Lee filmed on the actual killing fields of Missouri, letting the landscape tell part of the story as seasons shifted. Casting also played a key role. The studio wanted a traditional star like Matt Damon, but Lee fought for Tobey Maguire. His quieter, nervous energy suited the role of a young man caught up in a war bigger than himself. That decision gave the film a sense of vulnerability Hollywood often ignores. Ride with the Devil isn't here to glorify. It's here to remind us that the Old West's roots were tangled in the Civil War, and that survival often meant compromise, suffering, and choices with no good outcome. That's why historians still single it out as one of the most honest depictions of the era. The Cowboys 1972. At first glance, The Cowboys feels like another John Wayne vehicle, a star-driven Western about an older rancher guiding green kids on a cattle drive. But peel back the surface, and what you get is one of the most raw and historically grounded portrayals of frontier life ever made. The cattle drive wasn't just a backdrop, it was a way of life, and this film shows it with brutal honesty. Historians have praised how accurately the movie depicts the grind, the long days of riding, the unpredictable weather, the relentless fatigue. Every cow, every river crossing, every sleepless night mattered. A single mistake could mean disaster for the whole group, and that's exactly what the film communicates. Wayne's character isn't portrayed as invincible. He's tough, yes, but also burdened by the responsibility of shaping boys into men under the harshest conditions possible. And those boys? They weren't simply pretending. They actually went through cowboy boot camp, learning to ride, rope, and live the life they were portraying. When you see them on screen, you're not watching kids play dress-up, you're watching kids actually trying to survive the cowboy way. The justice system in the film is equally grounded. There's no courtroom drama or lengthy debates. When someone crossed the line, punishment was swift, often fatal, and delivered without hesitation. That was the real code of the frontier. Law was whatever the men on the trail could enforce. Jerry Goldsmith's score and the wide-open landscapes complete the authenticity. The Cowboys doesn't end with triumph. It ends with a reminder of how unforgiving the West could be, even for those who thought they were prepared. It's not a fun ride, it's a sobering one. And that's why historians still hold it up as one of the most realistic depictions of cowboy life ever filmed. Shane 1953. When people think of iconic westerns, Shane usually makes the list. But what often gets overlooked is just how groundbreaking it was in its commitment to realism. Director George Stevens didn't just want another frontier adventure, he wanted to show the West with all the weight and consequence that came with it. Part of that realism came from Stevens's own background. He had filmed World War II battlefields firsthand, and those experiences shaped his approach. When bullets hit in Shane, you feel it. Stevens used hidden wires to yank stunt performers off their feet, making the impact shockingly visceral for 1,953 audiences. When Jack Palance shoots Elisha Cook Jr., it wasn't just another bang scene, it was a turning point in how Hollywood staged violence. But authenticity wasn't limited to action. The film captures the tension between settlers and cattlemen in a way that reflects real frontier conflicts. The homesteaders aren't portrayed as saints, nor the ranchers as one-note villains. Instead, the story feels grounded in the genuine struggles of people carving lives out of contested land. Jean Arthur, coaxed out of retirement to play Marion Starrett, adds gravitas to the story. And Alan Ladd's portrayal of Shane, quiet, weary, reluctant, feels truer to the kind of drifter who would have actually wandered through Wyoming in the late 1800 seconds. Even author Jack Schaefer, who often disliked adaptations of his work, praised the film for capturing the essence of his novel. Shane is often remembered as a mythic tale of the lone hero, but beneath that legend is a movie obsessed with accuracy, detail, and consequence. It's not just a Western, it's a moment where Hollywood tried to meet history halfway, and for once, it worked. Monte Walsh, 1970. If Shane represents the birth of the cowboy myth, Monte Walsh captures its death. Released in 1970, the film follows Lee Marvin as an aging cowboy, realizing that his way of life has no place in a changing world. Unlike other westerns that romanticize the cowboy era, this one leans hard into melancholy realism. Marvin's Monte isn't a hero riding into glory. He's a tired man watching the range disappear, replaced by fences, railroads, and machines. His friend, played by Jack Palance, is equally disillusioned. Together, they represent the end of a generation. Their friendship is one of the film's most touching elements, showing that the true story of the West wasn't just about conflict, it was about bonds forged in hardship. Historians appreciate Monte Walsh because it doesn't lie. It shows the grind of ranch work, the smallness of cowboy pay, and the fact that even the toughest men couldn't hold back progress. There's no dramatic showdown that restores balance, no mythic ride into the sunset. Instead, there's resignation, acceptance, and a bittersweet acknowledgement that the cowboy was being pushed aside by a new century. Director William Fraker was primarily a cinematographer, and it shows in the film's stunning visuals. He frames the West as both vast and lonely, a land that could no longer provide for the men who once thrived there. Critics at the time didn't all get it. Gene Siskel dismissed it, while Roger Ebert called it as lovely a Western as I've seen in a long time. Looking back, Ebert's take feels right. Monte Walsh wasn't a hit, but it stands as one of the most historically faithful reflections of the cowboy's decline. It's not myth, it's elegy. Young Guns, 1988. When Young Guns first hit theaters, critics called it the Brat Pack on horseback. Emilio Estevez, Kiefer Sutherland, Lou Diamond Phillips. The cast looked more like teen idols than rugged outlaws. But looks can be deceiving, because underneath the surface, this was one of the most historically faithful depictions of Billy the Kid's story ever put on screen. Screenwriter John Fusco was obsessed with the real Lincoln County War. He wasn't content to recycle myths. He dug into court documents, letters, and first-hand accounts. Wherever possible, he used actual quotes from Billy the Kid and those around him. That attention to detail gave the film an edge most viewers missed at the time. Even the famous tintype photograph of Billy the Kid was recreated with painstaking accuracy, despite studio executives grumbling that it was a waste of effort. Fusco argued it was essential, and he was right. It's one of the film's most memorable moments because it feels like history being captured before your eyes. Estevez's performance also leaned into reality. Instead of playing Billy as a romanticized rebel, he showed him as cocky, reckless, and unpredictable, the way historians actually describe him. Historian Dr. Paul Hutton later called Young Guns one of the most accurate portrayals of the Lincoln County War in cinema. Yes, the casting gave it a glossy marketing hook, but the story was rooted in grit and truth. Young Guns is proof that even Hollywood stars can ride straight into history when the script is built on facts. For anyone who wants to see Billy the Kid without the tall tales, this film is the one to watch. Geronimo, an American legend, 1993. Most Westerns reduce native leaders to cliches. Geronimo, an American legend, refused to do that. Walter Hill and screenwriter John Milius teamed up to give one of the most authentic portrayals of the Apache struggle ever put on film. And they didn't just wing it, they brought in Apache consultants to guide everything from dialogue to cultural traditions. The production built entire villages from scratch, replicating what 19th century Apache settlements looked like. Costumes weren't generic fringed outfits. They were carefully designed based on surviving. examples of Apache dress and gear. Even the cavalry uniforms were tailored to match exact army records of the era. The actors who played soldiers had to go through military-style training, learning real drills and formations, so the battles would look like they did in the 1,880 seconds. The film captures the exhaustion and defiance of Geronimo's final campaign against overwhelming odds. It doesn't glamorize, it humanizes. That might explain why it didn't storm the box office. By the time it came out, audiences had already seen a made-for-TV Geronimo story just a week earlier. Timing killed its chances. But critics and historians praised it. Quentin Tarantino even called it a really great classic Western that audiences didn't deserve at the time. Watching it now, it feels like a lost gem, a film that takes history seriously without sacrificing drama. It's not about a legend turned into myth. It's about a man and his people fighting to hold on to their way of life. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, 2007. Few Westerns have ever obsessed over detail like this one. Andrew Dominic's The Assassination of Jesse James is a slow burn, yes, but every frame feels ripped out of an 1,880 seconds photograph. The clothes sag with wear, the guns look heavy and awkward, the Missouri landscapes feel lived in rather than staged. It's history, painted in light and shadow. The secret behind that realism? Author Ron Hansen, who wrote the novel, was deeply involved in the film. He's an expert on the period, and he stayed on set to keep things historically accurate. Hansen even cameoed as a reporter. When it was done, he called the script completely faithful to his book, a rare compliment in the world of adaptations. Brad Pitt plays Jesse James as a haunted, paranoid outlaw rather than a glamorous folk hero. Casey Affleck's Robert Ford oozes awkwardness and envy, the kind of personality historians believe really would have shadowed James. And the film doesn't rush to the infamous final scene. It lingers, showing how fear, betrayal, and hero worship intertwined in the real Jesse James saga. The result? Critics loved it, but audiences didn't. Its long runtime and wordy title scared off casual moviegoers, and it flopped financially. But those who saw it were blown away. Even Morgan Freeman admitted he kept rewinding scenes just to absorb the sheer detail. It may not have been a hit, but as a historical portrait, it's practically flawless. Heaven's Gate 1980. Say Heaven's Gate, and most people instantly think of failure, the film that destroyed United Artists, ballooned out of control, and became Hollywood's cautionary tale. But if you peel away the gossip and look at what Michael Cimino actually put on screen, you'll see something else. One of the most painstakingly accurate depictions of frontier conflict ever attempted. The story centers on the Johnson County War of the 1,890 seconds, a brutal clash where wealthy cattle barons tried to crush immigrant settlers. Cimino wanted audiences to feel that conflict in every frame, and he demanded a level of detail that bordered on obsession. Sets were torn down and rebuilt if the wood looked too new. Full-grown trees were transplanted into valleys to replicate Wyoming's rugged landscape exactly. Every extra wore period-accurate clothing from head to toe, right down to the stitching on boots no one in the audience would ever see. And then there's the legendary train sequence. Cimino didn't rely on models or trick photography. He had a full-sized locomotive dismantled, hauled over a mountain, and reassembled on location just so it would look authentic. That kind of commitment is almost unthinkable today. The budget spiraled from $11 million to an eye-watering $44 million, burying the studio in debt. Critics in 1980 didn't see authenticity, they saw chaos. The press shredded it, audiences stayed away, and the film became synonymous with disaster. But history has a funny way of catching up. Over the decades, Heaven's Gate has been reevaluated, and many now see it as a misunderstood masterpiece. Its costumes, sets, and atmosphere are praised as some of the most authentic in Western cinema. Chris Christopherson, who starred, still calls it a beautiful film that never got its due. Yes, it's long, messy, and indulgent, but as a slice of frontier history, Heaven's Gate is less like a movie and more like a time machine. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971. Forget heroic duels in spotless towns. Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller tossed out the Hollywood template and showed the West as it really was. Half-built, cold, and unforgiving. Right from the start, you see unfinished rooftops, muddy streets, and makeshift saloons where you can see actors' breath fog in the air. Warren Beatty plays McCabe, a gambler who thinks he can outwit the wilderness, and Julie Christie is Mrs. Miller, a pragmatic businesswoman. Their story is less about glory and more about survival in a world where comfort was a luxury and small mistakes could be fatal. Altman wasn't adapting a sweeping legend. He was adapting the daily grind of settlers trying to build lives in hostile terrain. He even had Beatty sewing his own shirt on camera, a small but telling moment you'd never see from a John Wayne hero. Historians love that touch. It captures the reality of self-reliance better than any gunfight could. The film's melancholy tone makes it stand out. Roger Ebert called it one of the saddest films I have ever seen, filled with longing that would never be fulfilled. That's what makes it so authentic. The West wasn't all triumphs. For most, it was disappointment, hardship, and endurance. McCabe and Mrs. Miller didn't mythologize the frontier. It stripped it bare, leaving only the grit, the cold, and the fragile humanity of those who lived it. That honesty makes it one of the most historically resonant westerns ever shot. The Alamo, 2004. Few events in Western lore have been retold as often as the Alamo, but while most versions turned it into a patriotic fable, John Lee Hancock's 2004 film tried something daring. It leaned hard into accuracy. Instead of grizzled old frontiersmen making a last stand, we see the defenders closer to who they really were, young, tired, and facing odds they knew they couldn't beat. Take Davy Crockett. Earlier films often painted him as a larger-than-life elder statesman. In reality, he was 49 at the time of the battle, still energetic, still witty, but not the white-haired legend audiences had been fed for decades. Hancock's film brings that truth back, showing Crockett as a man caught between myth and mortality. The film also nails the political tension of the era. It doesn't just frame the battle as a fight for freedom, it shows the messy negotiations between Texian settlers and the Mexican government, grounding the conflict in historical context. Every costume, cannon, and fortification was meticulously researched. When the final assault comes, it unfolds exactly as eyewitness accounts described, a pre-dawn strike that lasted less than 20 minutes. No bloated spectacle, just raw, chaotic inevitability. Disney poured a staggering $107 million into the production, building what was then the largest set in North America to recreate the Alamo in painstaking detail. Filming stretched on for months, with the climactic battle alone requiring over 4 weeks to stage. Despite all this effort, the film was overshadowed by the massive success of The Passion of the Christ and flopped at the box office. Yet critics like Roger Ebert defended it, praising its atmosphere of dread and loneliness. He called it a film that captured men waiting for certain death. That's not myth, that's history. For once, the Alamo wasn't polished into legend. It was shown as it truly was, a grim stand, defined by sacrifice and inevitability. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. Some westerns try to entertain. Ulzana's Raid tries to unsettle you. Directed by Robert Aldrich, it's a film that historians praise for its brutal honesty about frontier conflict. Instead of Hollywood gloss, you get a raw depiction of Apache raids and the devastating toll they took on both sides. Burt Lancaster plays a frontier scout, modeled on real-life guide Al Sieber, who had spent decades navigating the dangerous terrain between settlers and native warriors. The movie doesn't fall into cartoon good versus evil tropes. Instead, it shows the exhaustion, the mistrust, and the terrifying unpredictability of the era. Lancaster's character isn't a hero in shining light. He's a survivor who knows that every decision comes with a cost. The film was written by Alan Sharp, a Scottish screenwriter whose attention to detail turned the script into something historians still point to as unusually grounded. Tarantino has even called Ulzana's Raid one of his favorite westerns, precisely because of its refusal to sanitize the past. What makes it stand out is tone. There are no grand speeches or heroic showdowns, just long stretches of tension, sudden bursts of violence, and the grim reality of people living on the edge of survival. That's why, even today, it feels more like a historical case study than a Hollywood film. For those who want to know what life on the frontier actually looked like, Ulzana's Raid is as close as cinema gets. How the West was won 1962. Some westerns focus on a single outlaw or a lone showdown. How the West was won said, forget that, let's tell the entire story of westward expansion in one epic sweep, spanning 50 years, from 1839 to 1889, The film doesn't just follow one hero. It follows generations of a family, showing how the frontier evolved from untamed wilderness to a bustling, complicated new nation. For historians, it's a treasure chest of accuracy wrapped in big-screen spectacle. 3 directors shared the task: George Marshall, Henry Hathaway, and John Ford. Each brought their own flavor, covering different eras of expansion. You get wagon trains braving rivers, riverboats pushing commerce west, desperate buffalo hunts, and sprawling railroad camps, all recreated with obsessive attention to detail. The wagon train sequences, in particular, are legendary. Historians still point to them as some of the most authentic portrayals of pioneer journeys ever captured on film. The scale of the production is staggering. More than 12,000 extras were used, including real native tribes who lent cultural accuracy to the massive battle scenes. Costumes weren't pulled off a Hollywood rack, they were hand-stitched to mirror what 19th century settlers actually wore. Even the smallest items, from saddlebags to cookware, were chosen to reflect the time. Then, there was the technology. Filmed in Cinerama, a groundbreaking 3-camera system, it created a giant curved image that wrapped around audiences. The result was immersion unlike anything seen before, almost like being dropped straight into the 19th century. Audiences loved it. It became the second highest grossing film of 1,962, right behind Cleopatra. But unlike that troubled blockbuster, How the West Was Won actually made money. It may feel a little like a museum exhibit now, but that's also its strength. It's not just a Western, it's a stitched-together visual history lesson, loaded with grit, hardship, and the relentless push toward the frontier's edge. Open Range, 2003. When Kevin Costner directs a Western, you know he's going to sweat the details. Open Range is no exception. On the surface, it's a simple story: free-grazing cattlemen clashing with a ruthless rancher. But underneath, it's a study in how frontier justice really worked. What grabs you first is the look. Costner insisted on period-accurate clothes, battered saddles, and towns that felt lived in rather than painted on. The small Montana settlement, where most of the film takes place, looks muddy, cramped, and practical, the way real frontier towns would have been. The cattle drive sequences are equally grounded. You feel the monotony, the patience, and the constant risk that defined life on the open range. When conflict finally explodes, it's quick, messy, and terrifyingly real. Historians often note how the film captures the harsh reality of lawlessness. Disputes weren't solved in courts, they were handled on the spot. Robert Duvall's role as Boss Spearman adds a layer of grizzled authenticity. His performance feels like it could have walked straight out of the 1,880 seconds. And paired with Costner's stoic Charlie Waite, you get a duo that embodies the dying ethos of the cowboy code. Open Range isn't flashy, but that's why it works. It's a love letter to authenticity, showing how life on the frontier was both brutally difficult and quietly beautiful. Dances with Wolves, 1,990. Few films have shifted the Western genre like Dances with Wolves. While older movies reduced native characters to background players, Kevin Costner's epic gave them center stage and did it with care that historians applauded. The Lakota Sioux weren't generic tribes. The production worked with native consultants, hired native actors, and even had large portions of dialogue spoken in the Lakota language. That alone was revolutionary in Hollywood, where subtitles were considered risky. But authenticity didn't stop there. The depiction of U.S. Army life on the frontier was rooted in historical records, from the bleak outposts to the way soldiers interacted with local communities. The clothing, the tools, the buffalo hunts, all were reconstructed with obsessive accuracy. The film wasn't just about spectacle, it was about perspective. By showing the story through both the eyes of a disillusioned soldier and the Lakota people, Dances with Wolves painted a fuller picture of the cultural clash that defined the West. Historians praised its balance, and native communities widely embraced its respectful approach. It went on to win 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, and reignited mainstream interest in Westerns. But its greatest legacy is its authenticity. For once, Hollywood put in the effort to show native life as it really was, not as a backdrop, but as the heart of the story. The Outlaw Josey Wales, 1,976. Clint Eastwood built his career on mythic figures: the silent drifter, the stoic avenger, the gunslinger with no name. But with The Outlaw Josey Wales, he he pivoted to something grittier and far more grounded. Instead of a legend, he gave audiences a survivor, a man shaped not by Hollywood fantasy, but by the very real chaos of post-Civil War America. Josey Wales isn't a flawless hero. He's a bitter farmer who loses everything and is swept into the guerrilla wars that raged across Missouri and Kansas. Historians point out that these bushwhacker conflicts often continued long after the Civil War officially ended. Law on the frontier wasn't neat or organized. It was fragmented, local, and sometimes non-existent. The film captures that atmosphere perfectly. Eastwood insisted on authenticity in every detail. The clothing looks battered from years of use, rather than fresh from a wardrobe rack. The landscapes stretch on with the harsh beauty of the unsettled frontier, emphasizing how survival depended on endurance. Communities Wales encounters, from native tribes to struggling settlers, are shown with nuance and humanity, rather than painted as stereotypes. Even the dialogue carries a cadence rooted in 19th century phrasing, giving the story a layer of historical weight. What resonates most is the theme of survival and reinvention. Josey Wales isn't just fighting enemies, he's carving out a new identity in a fractured land. Along the way, he gathers a found family of misfits, outcasts, wanderers, and people searching for safety. That makes the film less about revenge, and more about building something new amid chaos. Historians appreciate the outlaw Josey Wales because it reflects a real transitional moment in the West, when the war was over on paper, but scars still ran deep. For Eastwood, it remains one of his defining roles. For history buffs, it's one of the most honest depictions of the bruised, complicated world that came after the Civil War. So there you have it. 15 westerns that didn't just play dress-up, but dug into the real grit of history. From the fading cowboys of Monte Walsh to the cultural weight of Dances with Wolves, these films remind us that truth can be just as riveting as myth. Which of these would you put at the top of the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into movie history. The frontier may be gone, but its stories are still riding strong.